What kind of world do I want to live in? I think about this question a lot.
For our generation and for specifically my group of people, which is refugees, the circumstances might dismantle any vision of the future that we have.
You're trying to rebuild, you're trying to make a future for yourself, and then the climate-related disaster comes and you start again. It's not about how it's affecting you now, it's about how it's affecting you your entire life.
First step to understand is that we're all a part of it. None of us are going to be left out by the crisis.
We're at a stage where if we don't act now, really there won't be very much left.
There are generations that will never see certain things that we grew up seeing in real life.
We have to start treating this like the emergency it is. To achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have to go from an intention to a serious commitment.
Business leaders really need to rethink how they conduct their business and invest in creating systems that are climate friendly.
The action I would like to see is accountability. Structures being put in place where countries aren't just asked to do something, but they're kept accountable to the decisions that they make.
There has to be that strong collaboration between government, between corporations, between youth activists to drive change forward.
The world I would want to live in is a world where imagining the future is not a privilege.
I want to live in a world where people do not give up on hope that a positive change is possible.
The fact that you're listening today means that you are willing to make a change.
Hello, and welcome, and thank you for being with us today. We are here to talk about digital inclusion, which of course now is an absolute prerequisite for pretty much every other kind of inclusion: financial inclusion, inclusion in healthcare and education. And we're here to talk about a really big global collaborative project called the 1 Billion Lives Challenge, which has been put together by the Edison Alliance. And it has some really big goals to address the SDGs by getting 1 billion people access online by 2025. So we have an amazing panel of people here to talk about this, and I'd like to introduce them. Before I do that, I just want to say to all of you, we are all very looking forward to hearing your questions, and there will be plenty of time for you to ask questions to the panel. So please, throughout the panel, hit the chat button and you can ask your questions and I will pass them along to our panelists. So first today, we have Hans Vestberg, who is the chairman and CEO of Verizon Communications. And before that, he was the president and CEO of Ericsson, another multinational telecommunications company. We also have Ruth Perret, who comes to us from Alphabet and Google, where she is Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. We have Badr Jafar, who is here from the UAE, and he is the CEO of Crescent Enterprises and Crescent Petroleum. And he also founded Pearl Initiative, which is a nonprofit committed to promoting corporate transparency in the Gulf region. And finally, we have Dr. Precious Molloy Motsepe, who is here from South Africa. She's the founder and CEO of the investment fund, the African Fashion International. And she's also the founder and CEO of the Motsepe Foundation, which focuses on education and women's empowerment. Thank you all so much for being with us today. So, Hans, I'd like to start with you. Can you give us an introduction to the Edison Alliance and to the 1 Billion Lives Challenge, and what was it created to do, and how is it going so far?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for hosting this. So it's actually started many, many years ago. I think that many of us have seen the importance of digital inclusion to be part of our society. Wherever you're born, wherever you come from, you should have the same possibilities. And of course, digital inclusion is the 21st century's infrastructure. Mobility, broadband, and cloud is actually making lives and possibilities for anyone wherever they are. So actually, it started already some 2007 or 8 or something when I learned about the Millennium Development Goals, start working with that, and saw that connectivity is so important. And of course, I was part of formulating the SDGs, and some might remember that I was fighting hard for goal 18, that we should have universal connectivity for every citizen on this planet. Of course, it's 17 goals, so that didn't really happen. But what happened was, of course, that we understood that in all 17 goals, the infrastructure behind it is, in many cases, mobility, broadband, and cloud to access all citizens of the world, being able to give them the services. However, we continue with that, and as the pandemic developed, we understood that reaching the SDGs is even harder right now with the economic downturn and this tough and pandemic that we had. So in a conversation with the World Economic Forum, we agreed that we need to kick off a multicultural, multidisciplinary, multi-segment work to see that we are making this planet more inclusive, because it's more important than ever to do a job, education, financial inclusion, healthcare using the digital that we have. So we decided that in the beginning of the year to launch the Edison Alliance with some 4 to 5 partners from the public, private, leading companies from all around the world. Some are representing here, of course, Root is part of it, but many others. But it's also the public sector, governments and NGOs, and of course, organizations like the Broadband Commission, GSMA is part of it. The whole idea is, of course, not only doing advocacy, it's also to making commitments. And not only that, also sharing the best practices for everyone involved to see that. We are focusing mainly in the beginning on financial inclusion, healthcare, and education. And today, as you rightfully said, our commitment from this Edison Alliance right now, which is the work together with WEF and all the partners and the 45 champions we have, is to commit to improve 1 billion lives by increasing affordable digital access to healthcare, finance, and education by 2025. And we have already kicked off. We have already given out a lot of commitments, but we're far away from there to change the 1 billion lives. But clearly, as we know the world right now, I mean, a vast majority of the world are not connected. Half of the world, 3.8 billion people, doesn't have the connectivity today. They have actually coverage in many cases, but they need affordable services, devices, and of course, in some cases, the technology literacy is too high. So it's a multidisciplinary work that works from accessibility, affordability, and usability of it. And I'm fortunate to have all these great champions from public and private sector to be part of this commitment that we launched today. And our job is to make this digital gap to be much smaller, having more people on the earth have the same opportunities regardless where they're born, where they live, where they come from. They should have the same opportunity. Maybe it's not going to be a hospital and a school that I had 5 minutes from where I was brought up. It might be a virtual school and a virtual healthcare, but they should have the same opportunity to compete and be part of our society. And that's what we are launching here today with the 1 billion, but the Edison Alliance that was formed in the beginning of the year. And we have much more to do until 2025. But I have to say I'm encouraged with all the support and all the team that is working on this, including the World Economic Forum supporting this enormously important project that we're embarking on. So that's sort of the history of it, where we are today. And I'm extremely fortunate to be the chairman of the Edison Alliance, but I'm relying on all the partners and the champions to do this and make this happen across the globe.
So can you give us some examples of the types of commitments you're talking about? So, I mean, obviously there are financial commitments, but what else are you securing from companies and governments, and what are you hoping to get partners to commit to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a couple of examples. I can talk about MasterCard. I mean, they will bring another 500 million people to the digital economy by 2025. Verizon, my company, we're committing to invest $3 billion across a 5-year span for youth and small businesses and individuals in the need of connectivity. And the list goes on, including University of Cape Town, the Apollo hospitals from India, Qualcomm, of course, Ruth will talk about what Google is doing. So I think we all are rallying together, but it's also sharing, advocacy, talking to governments, where are the public and private starting and ending, so it's a lot of commitment. It's not only financial, it's also where you're actually going to educate youth that we are doing and others are doing on the illiteracy of technology, having technology access to website, understanding how to read website, making them simpler to use. There's a lot of things. Sometimes we make it very simple, talking the accessibility of the technology is the only thing, but it is affordability and it's usability. And I think all the champions that we're working with are trying to make that happen, and especially focusing then on healthcare, education, and financial inclusion. There are many other areas as well, but we wanted to be narrowing down the scope from the beginning in order to see that we make a really impact on these. And that's the commitment of 1 billion people being part of it.
Yeah, those certainly make sense to me as the first three priorities. But that's a good segue to you, Ruth. Can you tell us about what Google is committing to doing? And I'm also curious in how you're thinking about how those commitments are aligning to the SDGs.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here, and I think it's such an important conversation. You know, if the pandemic did anything, it put a big spotlight on inequities in society. It amplified them, but they were not new. And to Hans's point, we've been focused on many of the solutions prior, and I think the critical nature of what we're talking about here today is we all need to come together, because it's by working with one another, public sector, private sector, NGOs, that we can really focus and accelerate the delivery of these solutions. So just to pick up on two of the areas that Hans mentioned, first on digital inclusion and education. This has been a prime focus for us at Google for quite some time. Back in 2015, we launched a digital skills training program called Grow with Google. And initially we started with IT job training, IT support job training, one of the fastest growing areas for jobs. And our view was that we could take people with no experience and within 3 to 6 months, give them the training they needed to get the jobs of the future. And what we concluded was that this was so effective, we wanted to create a certificate so that there was something that was portable, that really documented what people had achieved. And then we recently have expanded our program, so it's not just IT support, but we also do project management, data analytics, user experience. So there are a number of different career paths. And again, with no pre-training, you can get these the training and the certificate within a short period of time. I think the most important part, and very much to Hans's opening comments, we need to work together. So we said, let's create a consortium. We now have over 130 companies who accept this certificate. And Hans, thank you for Verizon's leadership here. B of A's involved, Deloitte, and many others, Walmart. And we're excited to invite anybody else in so that, again, we're building a community that accepts these types of digital skills training. And we've seen in practice the transformative nature it has. So super excited about it. 2 examples for small businesses in the US, 1 in 3 small businesses said they would have failed in the pandemic if they didn't have digital skills. So this is the kind of training that we can provide, and it's the backbone of economies globally. The second, for individuals, I was in London a couple of weeks ago at one of our digital skills training programs. I was actually at Arsenal Football Club, where there was a job program going on. And we brought together some people who had gone through our training program. And I'll never forget the last person who spoke. He came to us, Kagwe from Zambia, had come to the UK. He was studying in the UK, and he couldn't get a job at the end of it. And he actually said he gave up on the idea that he could get a job. And then he went in and went through the Grow with Google digital skills training program. And it was such a great way to end the day, because he said he got a job, but he also got confidence that he had a role in the future. And I love this comment in the opening video, imagining the the future. We need to let people see that they are part of the future. And that's exactly what he said in this session. So invite anybody who wants to join in this type of program and aligning with other digital skills programs that they have. The second area that's super important is on health. I mean, we've all been living through this. And one of the areas that's been so core to us at Google is making sure that we're amplifying high quality information so people know where to go. And that means really teaming up with the best in class World Health Organization and others and amplifying their information. It also means doing everything that we can to help facilitate distribution of vaccines. So working with COVAX as an example. And again, these are examples where individually, yes, we're committed and we're doing a lot. And we find that as we team up, public sector, private sector, NGOs, as Hans said is in your opening comments, we're going to have much bigger impact at a much more accelerated pace. And so we look forward to continuing to execute against this and seeing progress towards the billion goal.
So I'm curious. I mean, Hans mentioned at the beginning that part of the problem is people who don't have access at all to the digital world. But a big problem is affordability, and that's true even in the most developed economies and even in the US. When you're thinking about some of this problem solving, how much are these solutions kind of portable around the world, and how much are you needing to think about things very tied to the places that you're trying to solve the problems?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, fortunately, phones are quite ubiquitous, and the ability to train people, what we're trying to do is make this as easy and portable as possible. And so the Digital Skills Training Program is an online program, and it's available. It's free. You can get online and learn it. And we're also providing support for those who go through a program and they need incremental financial support because they're working through how do you get a certificate. It is a key part of it. And I think that one of the things that we're really focused on is what is really plays to Google's strengths, and that is giving people the jobs and skills of the future. And so one of the things that we've done as we've evolved our program is we started with substantial training, millions of people trained around the globe. And then we said what we really want to look at is measure who the percentage of people who got a better job or higher pay as a result of it. So this is trying to open pathways to the future for them. And most certainly, to your point, it's about making it as broadly available as possible.
Great. Okay, so Badr, this is all going to cost a lot of money. So that's what I would like you to talk about is what are the innovative and sustainable methods of securing capital we can use to support all of this? How do we deal with competition? How do we deal with getting the right money with the right patients for the right projects?
So allow me to make an overarching observation, which is that we mustn't get carried away with the narrative that digital empowerment is somehow an end in itself. Addressing, of course, the global challenges that humanity and our habitat faces is the ultimate goal, right? So technology is a means to that end, and technology in itself isn't the agent of change either. We, the connected people, are the true agents of change, and history will judge us on whether we use these tools for the collective betterment of humanity and our habitat, or for the exacerbation of our own flaws. I am far less accomplished than my fellow panelists to opine on specific opportunities within the sector itself, but what I'd very much like to see is a strategy that's built around an overall purpose of equipping our youth, predominantly, particularly underrepresented and underserved, with the digital tools that they need to be effective change makers. So empowering them to be the change that they want to see in this world. And this statement of purpose or theory of change or whatever we choose to call it should help to guide all stakeholders to come together towards a unified objective of creating a digitally empowered global community with, as has been said, inclusive access to all essential services, financial, educational, medical, and of course, entertainment, and with a heightened sense of awareness and sense of shared responsibility to transcend borders, both physical and social, in aid of our common objectives and global goals. And of course, the opportunity, as again has been mentioned, is massive, right? As we know, only half of the global population is estimated to be using the internet, leaving, as Hans mentioned, about 3.8 billion people offline. Also, the global proportion of women using the internet is lower compared to men, and the divide is growing. In less developed countries, less than a quarter of people are reported to have digitally relevant skills compared to more than 3/4 in developed countries. When it comes to big data, for example, Africa and Latin America account for less than 5% of the world data centers. So if we are to solve our global challenges and meet the SDGs in 8 or so years' time, we need to access all the human capital available and the creative minds and hearts out there. And we can only do that with the pace that's required through digital empowerment. On investment models, today, I think the business case for connecting the unconnected, aside from the moral or social imperative, is really a no-brainer. I mean, an estimated 70% of new value created in the economy over the next decade will be based on digitally enabled platforms. Historically, I think governments have been the main financiers for digital infrastructure. However, long-term private capital in this space is significantly on the rise. I mean, just taking India as an example, pre-1990s, telecom infrastructure was funded solely by the government. But after the liberalization and privatization incentives in the 90s, 85% of the subsequent spend on digital infrastructure has been by private players. What was, of course, key is, it relied on a conducive regulatory and commercial framework that enabled private capital to enter and flourish. And today, with trillions of dollars of capital chasing yield in a zero interest rate environment, long-term, stable, tariff-based investment opportunities like digital infrastructure is super compelling. So while there's always room, I think, for more creative investment models and tools, I think the more significant question to ask here is perhaps twofold. What is holding back more private patient capital from plugging the gaps wherever they exist? And how can we accelerate the establishment of compelling and transparent regulatory and investment frameworks to catalyze more investment in digital infrastructure?
How would you start to answer both of those questions? So what do you think the main thing holding back that capital is, and what's the most urgent solution that needs to be put into place to encourage it?
So I'm no expert, but from a Middle East and North African standpoint, I think it's what I mentioned, which is that enabling environment, that conducive regulatory environment, and also commercial frameworks to encourage those capital flows. I think another challenge that we face in the region is sometimes government monopolies, businesses that are primarily owned by or majority owned by government, who exclude the private sector from engaging and perhaps investing in this for one reason or another. So those are some obvious, I think, ways we can help to unlock private capital. And I imagine that some of those challenges are similar in other developing regions of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that's right. So Precious, we're going to end with you. And I'm really excited because at Quartz, we cover African innovation a great deal. And we put together a list of innovators in Africa that's actually coming out tomorrow, and it's all women. And the amazing thing, thinking about it today, is that almost everybody on that list is working with inclusion in one of these areas, and they're doing amazing things. So I'm curious to hear more from you, like thinking about this from a regional perspective. What are some of the challenges that are particular to South Africa and to Africa more generally? And what are the opportunities there? Because I know there's been so much work on these issues there. And then in particular, I'd love for you to talk about this question of women and equity when it comes to digital inclusion. That's a lot.
Well, Thank you very much. I'll try and cover as much as I can, but I think if I may start with the gender, question, we are very far from gender equality when it comes to accessing the digital economy. And as things stand, women will lose out on the fourth industrial revolution gains that are being made and that's purely for two reasons. One is because most women participate at lower occupation bands than men, and also we know that these bands are involved with repeatable tasks which are most likely going to be replaced. And secondly, with women being not well represented in leadership and senior management positions all over the continent, that is a problem. Girls not being more involved in STEM subjects than boys means that there will be less voice and agency in shaping and the impact of the technologies that come out without the voice from women and girls. So I think it is very, very important in this day and age to ensure that women are well represented within this digital inclusion discussions that we have. And what we are doing at the Motsepe Foundation is we have started programs since dating back to 2017. We started a program called Girls in STEM, where we teach girls from high schools already, expose them and their teachers. We're currently working in 64 schools where we expose young girls and their teachers to women who are already in the STEM fields and in the STEM careers. That we hope will encourage them to choose subjects that will ensure that they follow STEM career paths in future, as engineers, scientists, and mathematicians. I think the inclusion of girls in STEM fields is very, very important, but equally important is for us to ensure that postdoctoral studies, postgraduate studies, we have women represented in the STEM fields, as well as in research. We need more women involved in research, and I'm happy to hear you saying that you have a cohort of women that are doing very great things, and I'll hope to hear about that announcement tomorrow. Now, moving on to the challenges. I'm with the University of Cape Town, and very proud that UCT Online has also been represented in the prize that was announced earlier today with Uplink. But as we went through the pandemic, we saw firsthand how students who, some of our students, we support students with bursaries in 27 universities throughout South Africa, and most of our students come from poor homes. So when we were able to offer them laptops so they could work at home, offer them data so they could access lectures and be able to present their assignments on time, the challenge was that they were now not in contact with teachers and their colleagues. They missed that ecosystem. So I like the point that was made that digital is not going to solve all our problems. We should not forget the psychosocial dynamic, particularly for students that come from poorer communities. And I'm very excited about the Edison Alliance because I believe we will be able, as a collective, to solve challenges that people from poorer communities face. For me, one of the big issues is also price support for particularly youth, price support for mobile data, particularly for youth and marginalized communities. Affordable Data Compact, I guess, I don't know, but it would be fantastic to hear from Hans what the big companies are doing around coming up with a compact of affordable data that would be made available for these poor communities as well as youth. Because right now, what separates the poor and the wealthy in digital inclusion remains that the price point.
Hans, that's an interesting question. Do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you need to go to the use cases. I mean, I just going to give you one quote. I mean, the ITU, and the Broadband Commission just came out with an annual report of digitalization. And the interesting fact, and I think that is telling, is that 3.8 billion people are not connected, but 85% of them have broadband coverage. So it's more about the affordability and having use cases or application that is usable. I mean, we all love to have streaming services and look at TV, but here we're talking about essential services for citizens in every country in the world. And that's why what Precious is saying, we need to see that we co-develop applications for healthcare, education, financial inclusions, and seeing that we have price plans that follow that. And services and accessibility of technology that is supporting that. The only way to do that in a good way is actually mobility broadband because of the scales of it, and cloud services, the only way to bring it efficiency to you. So I think I agree with what Jafar said as all of that. The means is, of course, the application and the usage, but the foundation has to be there, and the foundation is actually the mobility, broadband, and cloud, which I claim is a 21st century infrastructure, because we will not have brick and mortar as we had for every citizen in the world in order to capture everyone to have the potential. So I see actually a collaboration with governments very much when it comes to those price plans. And we see, I mean, the Edison Alliance has already started sharing a couple of important things. One is that we see subsidies of broadband services to low-income families in countries like in the US, but in many other countries as well. As important as we know, food is always number one. There's no discussion about that. But, you know, suddenly with the digital inclusion, actually being able to access it is a high necessity to be part of our society. The other thing that we have launched in the Edison Alliance, which I'm proud to be part of as well, is that the financing of digital inclusion. We see bonds coming out in the market where you can use your leverage as a global corporation. I mean, Ruth and I would know it because we're borrowing a lot of money, and we can actually put money towards green bonds, digital inclusion bonds, today, because those tools did not exist before. They're equally good as any other bond, but we can dedicate money to it, and we have financiers that are coming in. And we just released from the Edison Alliance the playbook for doing that, and there's a lot of companies starting doing both green bonds but also digital inclusive bonds. So that means that the money that we spend is actually invested for getting digital inclusion. So there are new ways, but I agree with Precious that we need to find the right models for the right type of citizens so they get the services. And that's what we want in the Edison Alliance. We want to share that. We want to share what Ruth is talking about when it comes to inclusion and education and getting better jobs by being included. That's what is important for us.
So Ruth, there's actually a question from the audience about ESG bonds and how those relate to Google's goals for the next billion users. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm delighted to. I'm building right off of Hansa's comment. So last year we issued a $10 billion bond, of which $5.75 billion was designated to support sustainability efforts. 5 of those were around climate change. 3 of them were around social issues, affordable housing, racial equity, and COVID-related small business support. And the reason I wanted to issue this as a sustainability bond really hit on a number of the things that we were talking about. My view was that it was important to put out publicly what we were doing, and then you're held accountable to report on that on a regular basis. It opens up and supports the creation of this very important new asset class. There's obviously no silver bullet to solve the problems that we have in front of us. We have to bring a lot of different elements together. Investors want to participate in it. There isn't enough product in which to invest. So it's a really smart opportunity for corporate issuers, for government issuers. A sustainability bond is a way to access new capital and enable others to invest in the initiatives that you delineate. It has to be done in a high quality way. I think listing what is it that you're doing, the accountability, the auditing of it is all important to really protect the quality of these investments and commitments. But I'm really excited about it, and it is an open market and one that's evolved from green bonds, which are important in and of themselves, to this broader set of social issues under the umbrella called sustainability bonds.
So there's a question about rural connectivity, which I'm interested in, and I'm not sure which. I think all of you would have really interesting perspectives on this. So please let me know if you want to answer this. But the question is specifically about how to finance global rural connectivity to tap all of this potential. But I'm also curious about what the particular challenges are there. I mean, we've talked about different contexts, but what are the challenges that are in rural areas now, and how are they different in the past, and what needs to be done from a finance perspective, but also just in terms of business models and partnerships in order to actually deal with those challenges this time. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can just mention one thing that I think you're facing when you're rolling out network. That is the power grid is actually not equally distributed as the technology grid when it comes to mobility, broadband. That is far greater, the grid, than the power. And of course, that is posing a challenge, especially in the rural areas, because that means that you need to use generators or diesel or whatever, which is not good, So I think that's one of the challenges, because it's become not only good for the environment, but it's also not sustainable over time to do that. So I think the power grid is one, because then you need to charge your phones or whatever device you have as well. So that's things that you need to fight in the rural areas across the globe and improve. And of course, with the sort of green energy coming in, we need to have more and more of that to see that the rural communities can get green energy. And that's what Ruth talked about when it comes to doing green bonds or sustainable bonds. The ones that can do it and have the means, like Ruth and Google, and I would say Verizon. We have also done our green bond very clear. The money needs to go to, we are accountable for it. So I think that's a way to do it and use the responsibility that large corporations have in this area. But that's a challenge in the rural areas to get this out. And then, of course, devices is still too expensive in many cases, that we need to work with that. And that, if it's a pad or a phone or whatever, the device that you communicate is still too expensive, even though we're driving down the price dramatically as we use the same technology regardless of where you are in the world. That's why we have so many people that are connected today, but we still have a way to go.
Badr, from a finance perspective, how do you think about this question of rural connectivity?
Well, just a point I'd like to make about the business dimension overall. While digital inclusion is, I think, more often than not spoken about at the human level, I think it's important to consider that it also exists at the business level, right? In many ways, the dynamics of both digital divides mirror one another. As we know, there is a significant gap between the digital capabilities of SMEs and large enterprises or digitally native tech startups. And this is prevalent globally, but more so in emerging markets and rural areas like the MENA region, where, as we know, SMEs account for over 90% of all businesses and are a major source of desperately needed job creation and economic growth. The digital gap between businesses has also widened during the pandemic, especially in areas where I think critical mass matters for cost effectiveness, things like enterprise resource planning and supply chain or customer relationship management. And there's also an internal skills gap that I think prevents businesses from identifying and implementing digital solutions that are increasingly required to compete. Larger businesses, I think, as well as governments, have a role to play here, including through the creation of upskilling incentives and networks. Ultimately, of course, the answer lies beyond digital connectivity of SMEs. Again, digital technology must be seen as a tool to enable and empower small businesses to scale their businesses and enhance their productivity, creating new jobs and economic opportunities. As an Edison Alliance partner, we, as Crescent Enterprises, are looking to work to scale up SME digital capacity in the Middle East and North Africa region by encouraging digital training and upskilling, and also building a data culture within SMEs across our own supply chain, and enhancing their access to new technologies and knowledge networks.
So the rural power grid challenge that Hans mentioned is a good example of a place where there's a lot of on the ground innovation where that's happening. And we have a question from the audience about how the Edison Alliance is keeping track of the bottom up innovations that can really boost digital inclusion, but that are often hidden from larger institutions like the institutions that are leading some of this work. So I wanted to start with you, Precious, and hear your insight on how to make sure that the innovations that are happening sometimes in very small companies or very local situations are getting fed back so that a very large collaboration like this can take advantage of them and scale them.
Thank you for that question. I think that, I've just been traveling on the continent. In the last 8 months, I've traveled to 12 African cities, and I'm just amazed at the dynamism and energy of young people on the continent. And we need to be tapping into this energy right now. So your question on how we then tap into that innovation from these young people is very important. And I think that at this stage, institutions such as universities, as I said, UCT Chancellor, are important points of collecting and working and identifying these young people and ensuring that with their innovations and protected, they're able to be accommodated and mainstreamed into bigger collaborations as we have in the Edison Alliance. At the moment, as a foundation, we are in talks with a company where we want to also provide rural Wi-Fi infrastructure for our communities. And what is important for us is to ensure that ultimately the network ownership and maintenance of the infrastructure is with the communities themselves. Because that way we will be then ensuring that this is truly, truly inclusive. And lastly, I just want to say that as part of trying to ensure that, digital finance particularly is accessible to women and young people, what we have invested, we've made a huge investment in a digital bank that is one of the fastest growing in the region with more than 120,000 people signing up every month. And what I like about them is that they work with women, particularly women in rural communities, who educate young people, marginalized people about how to access banking facilities, how to use the banking facilities, and they also ensure that when it comes to lending to these small businesses, they do not use, particularly women-owned businesses, they do not only look at assets, but also look at sales to ensure that they can borrow. And lastly, they look at disaggregate data to ensure that whatever solutions they provide will answer to the needs of the particular economy.
So sadly, we are so close to being out of time. But so I have one final question, and really, this can come from any of you, and please feel free to jump in. We have 3 minutes left, so I'd love to hear from as many of you as we have time for. But really, stepping way back to try to sum this up, what do you think is the greatest challenge right now? And I'm thinking about this in the context of the pandemic. So that's obviously, exposed a lot of this. It's created clarity over the need. It's made a lot of things harder, but it's an opportunity. It's made a lot of things possible that weren't possible before. So what is the biggest challenge and what's the biggest opportunity? How will we know, other than being able to count off these 1 billion people, how will we know that this effort has really succeeded a year or two from now? Ruth, let's start with you, and we'll see how far we get.
So I think you're absolutely right that the opportunity is that what we've been through is so awful that if we don't come together now, when are we going to come together? And so this really is the time to have this call to arms. We've got to fix these issues. There was a recent study that came out that Stanford University, Langone Hospital, and Bath were involved in, and it said that something like 3/4 of kids from 16 to 25 are terrified of the future. That's the future we've all built. It is our obligation to address it. So I think that's the greatest opportunity, which is we've got to mobilize. We have to build on one another. All of the comments that we've talked about here today, it really is the same group, underserved, underrepresented, that are constantly at the bottom on education, on jobs, on health, on every element. And so through a multiplicity of programs, digital skills training, health initiatives, education initiatives, climate change, it is only through all of that that we're going to solve this. And I think the most important is put aside our parochial, what's our program, come together and build on one another and drive to solutions and to your core of your question, and then hold ourselves accountable. How many lives are we actually improving? Where are we seeing the progress? And so that's what we're committed to do, and look forward to working with others on this.
And Hans, do you have a final thought for us on that?
No, I couldn't agree more on what Ruth is saying. And I think that what we have experienced the last 18 months across the globe, is devastating to see. But it also have probably accelerated the leapfrog of technology use of 5 to 7 years. Usually we can progress with technology, but now we have an even wider gap. And that also means we have a wider gap to reaching the SDGs. So I think the urgency of working together, and the Edison Alliance, exactly as Ruth said, is not about inventing a lot of new things. There will be that as well, but it's also building on the great things that many people are doing in corporations, public, private, and do it together in a better way. And I'm so encouraged what I've seen, because there's no one that I asked that wouldn't say, hey, I want to be part of it. I can do whatever I can do in my capacity. I will do it. And that encouragement, I think, is driving me and many others in the Edison Alliance to take this forward. So I'm encouraged, and of course encouraged to listen to my fellows here on this panel and the questions I was seeing, that many people are really excited to help on this, and it's such an important thing.
Well, thank you, all of you, for the work that you're doing and for being here with us today and telling us about it. And thank you to everyone who's here watching and listening. And of course, there are many more fascinating and important panels for you to watch on TopLink. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are.